Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming to the Commission's Environmental Updates training course. I'm Nikki Kernew, Manager of Resource Development. Please let us know on the chat line if you're having any issue hearing or viewing the presentation as we go through. The training course today covers a fair amount of material, so we'll follow the agenda that you were provided with quite closely to ensure we cover all the content in the allotted time frame. For those of you dialing in and following with PowerPoint, you'll note that we sent an updated version of the PowerPoint this afternoon, and you'll want to use that because some changes were made. There will also be an interactive question period at the end of the session and some live demonstration of EIMS. We'll do our best at that time to answer all your questions. This session will also be recorded and made available on the website as a tutorial following the session. I'll be starting with an overview of the 3 new environmental updates, then moving into scenario training so we can review how each of these updates will be utilized in the application process and how the updates work together. For this reason, we will be leaving all questions for the end of the session. We'll be starting with planning and operational measures, or POMs. POMs are the foundation of these environmental updates. The planning and operational measures have been developed by the Commission to clarify expectations for oil and gas activities in areas of environmental value. Currently, POMs have been developed for riparian areas, wildlife and wildlife habitat, old growth management areas, and resource features. The Commission continues to develop the POMs and will have them all done for all the environmental values under the EPMR by the end of this year. As we said earlier, POMs have been developed to clarify application expectations and requirements. The purpose behind this is to reduce the requirements for mitigation strategies. Now, where an application adheres to the planning and operational measures and guidance available in the EPMG, in most cases, applications will no longer require a mitigation strategy or a rationale. So what are the POMs? POMs identify objectives for each area of environmental value and provide both planning and operational measures developed as oil and gas activity-specific guidance for working in these areas. Timing measures are the measures the applicant should incorporate at the planning phase. These are things like activity placement, layout, and activities types to avoid, in general, avoiding and minimizing impacts. Operational measures are the measures that should be employed during the operational phase of an activity and can and likely will be mandated by permit conditions. These are things like timing, restoration requirements, and restoration timing. These help alleviate impacts to the environment. Here I have an example from the EPMG of riparian POMs. As you can see, this table clarifies expectations for oil and gas activities overlapping riparian areas: maintain riparian habitat, vegetative cover, substrate quality, pool depth and volume, large woody debris, groundwater flow, water quality, temperature, channel structure, and hydrological characteristics of the sites. That's the objective. The planning measures that will help us achieve that are things such as avoiding and minimizing impacts. Avoidance is ensuring all your locationally flexible activities are located outside the riparian areas, and reuse or use of pre-existing areas of disturbance instead of creating new disturbance when possible. Operational measures include things like adhering to timing windows, and where possible, working in weather conditions that minimize impacts, things such as minimal rainfall, events, and frozen conditions where possible. Also, the expectation is that you'll restore your habitat expediently. The purpose of POMs is to clarify and reduce workload. Both decision makers and applicants will be working from the same guidance. A routine application overlapping an environmental value will no longer require a rationale or mitigation strategy where the application adheres to the POMs. A rationale is only required when an application is not able to comply with the POMs. A rationale is a precise document prepared by a QP. In this document, the applicant will be required to indicate why the planning and operational measures cannot be met and what measures will be taken to ensure that the area's objectives are still met. Going forward, a full mitigation strategy will only be required in situations where an area is in enhanced management or regulatory policy ABA status, or special situations at the discretion of a decision maker. A mitigation strategy is a more fulsome document than a rationale. Specific requirements for the content and preparation of the mitigation strategy can be located in the revised Appendix B of the EPMG. In July 2017, the EPMG was updated to include planning and operational measures and guidance for use of these measures. Next, we're going to talk about the Environmental Information Management System, or EIMS. EIMS is an internal and external facing online information portal housing detailed oil and gas planning and operational measures for a selection of wildlife species and all wildlife habitat areas and ungulate winter range in Northeast BC. The wildlife planning and operational measures housed in EIMS are a summary of subject matter expertise, available existing wildlife guidance such as the EPMR, EPMG, species accounts, WIMS, and wildlife compendium. Currently, EIMS only contains planning and operational measures for wildlife. Future development will include planning and operational measures for all environmental values under the EPMR. Users can access EIMS from the online services on the BC-OGC website. Click into the BC-OGC website, online services, and you'll see a hoof. The ungulate hoof, once you click on that, will take you directly into the EIMS homepage. EIMS Home gives an overview of what is included in EIMS and some additional guidance around timing windows and boreal caribou. In EIMS, you're able to search by species and by ungulate, winter range, and WHA tag number. Here, by species, you can see we have a list. You can pick, for example, Connecticut warbler. Here you can see key habitat features, planning and operational measures, and site objectives. You can also see links to WHAs in BC and the links to the source data from which these planning and operational measures were made from. When searching by UWR or WHA tag number, you simply key in the number and it'll come to your site. Here, this example is 9-050, a northern caribou WHA. You can see it includes oil and gas guidance and ABA specific guidance for northern caribou in this WHA. We'll explore EIMS in much more detail later in this session. Next, we will introduce and review ABA wildlife. ABA now supports 3 values: riparian, old forest, and wildlife. ABA wildlife is based on intactness of ungulate winter range and wildlife habitat areas in Northeast BC. For small WHA, less than 100 hectare, ABA wildlife has also incorporated a 100-meter buffer to protect against edge effects. ABA wildlife, like all other ABA values, is risk-ranked normal, enhanced management, or regulatory policy based on its intactness level. This map is an overview of ABA wildlife in Northeast BC. As you can see, currently 80% of our wildlife habitat areas and ungulate winter ranges in Northeast BC are normal status. About 7% are in enhanced management status and 13% are in regulatory policy. Guidance for all UWR and WHA are located in EIMS. This example here is 9-107. This is a Fisher WHA. POMs for Fisher apply to ABA status normal, and further guidance is provided for ABA status enhanced management and regulatory policy. We'll look closer at that when we go through our scenario training. Guidance for all oil and gas activities in WHA and UWR vary with the ABA status and reflect the objectives of each specific ungulate winter range or wildlife habitat area order. This here is an example of the new ABA status reports. These and our standard ABA shapefiles are online, available on BCOGC online services. Under the ABA tab, you can find these updated and current reports and our standard shapefiles updated regularly. Next, we're going to move into scenario training. In scenario training, we'll review how each of these updates works in the planning and application phase, In the scenarios we have demonstrated the application planning phase in both ArcGIS and EIMS application mapping tool. The expectation is that you'll utilize the mapping tool of your choice to undertake the pre-application review process. Scenario 1 is a very simple introduction to using planning and operational measures. This will be done by reviewing a pipeline application that intersects with a riparian area. In ArcGIS, you can see that the proposed activity overlaps a riparian area. This riparian area is ABA status normal. This means it is a routine application and that the planning and operational measures for riparian areas would apply. Riparian values and planning and operational measures for riparian areas are located in the EPMG Section 1.5 riparian values. You can see here that there's, as we've seen before, there's objectives for riparian areas and there's operational measures, planning and operational measures to be considered for all activities. There's also specific guidance for specific types of oil and gas activities. So for our pipeline application, linear feature POMs would apply. In summary, we can see that some of the planning and operational measures for linear activity in a riparian area would include things like minimizing the number of stream crossings. Where a stream crossing is required or the best choice, you will minimize that clearing width and protect riparian habitat. You'll also look to be planning your activity for within weather conditions that minimize impacts. For stream crossings, often that's frozen conditions. For operational measures, we'll be looking for things like implementing appropriate erosion and sediment control measures, and also immediately following your activity completion, implementing access control and restoration measures. These operational measures can and will likely be mandated by permit conditions. Once your application planning is complete, you can create your application in EIMS, upload your shapefile, and then you can review your application in the EIMS map. This will ensure that all values overlapped by your application have been identified. So now we've reviewed the planning and operational measures. In this application, we're going to say that the application is able to meet the planning and operational measures. To do this, to indicate this in EIMS, first we would go to the Stewardship tab. And in the section that asks, does your application adhere to the Environmental Protection and Management Guideline, which this defaults to no. If your application adheres to POM, please change this to yes. And by doing so, you've indicated that your application is adhering to the planning and operational measures and nothing further is required. However, if your application does not comply with the POMs, you will choose no. At that time, the mandatory mitigation strategy upload prompt will show. This is where a rationale or mitigation strategy, if required, should be uploaded. You will also see a second question, which will prompt you to confirm if an exemption requested from Part 3 of the Environmental Protection and Management Regulation is required. This question defaults to no and does not apply to the planning and operational measures, so should be left as no. In the near future, EIMS will be updating the wording in this section to specify adherence to planning and operational measures. When this becomes mandatory, this change becomes a mandatory requirement. An industry bulletin or some other form of information will be sent out to industry so they know that this change has occurred. Next, I'd like to move into Scenario 2. Scenario 2 reviews the planning and operational measures and introduces EIMS as the support tool. This is going to be done by reviewing a well application intersecting with the CDC polygon for black-throated green warbler. Here in EIMS, we create an application and upload our shapefile. We'll also be turning on our wildlife information layer so that we are able to see that the proposed activity overlaps the CDC polygon. You can see here it's overlapping a polygon. In order to determine what species it's impacting, we would use our analysis tool to access the information from the wildlife layer. This gives us the the information that it is a CDC polygon for black-throated green warbler. From this, we know wildlife palms apply. The first step when assessing wildlife planning and operational measures is go to the EPMG and review key habitat features and planning and operational measures that are relevant for all wildlife species. Next, for species-specific information, we go into EIMS. In EIMS, we're able to search by species. As you can see here, we have typed in black-throated green warbler, and we can go and see that we have key habitat features, objectives, a listing of WHAs, some links to relevant wildlife background information, and of course, our planning and operational measures. From EIMS, we can see that the objectives of this CDC polygon are minimizing disruption of nesting warblers, so activity timing is key, and maintaining greater than 2 hectares forest patch size is also important. So location of our activity in relation to stand dynamics is also key. Palms for black-throated green warbler are quite simple. If your works cannot be located outside this area, you need to plan for activities to allow the retention of greater than 2 hectare forest patches and operate outside the timing windows and or use setbacks to avoid impacts to nesting warblers. Here's a little bit of a tip. You can use ABA Old Forest Layer in EIMS to identify mature forest stands. So when we overlay the CDC polygon we're looking at here, we can see that currently the application is planned in some mature forest stands. But if there is some locational flexibility in the locating of this well pad, they may be able to move it into a previously cleared area and impact less valuable warbler habitat. When you're ready to submit your application, you need to, again, indicate in the Stewardship tab in EIMS whether your application adheres to the EPMG, and by doing so indicate it adheres to the PALMs or not. Where the question is asked, does the application adhere to the Environmental Protection and Management Guideline? If your PALMs meet, or if the PALMs are being met, indicate yes and nothing further is required. If the PALMs are not met, indicate no, and you will be required to upload your rationale or mitigation strategy. Scenario 3. Scenario 3 reviews the planning and operational measures and EIMS and introduces the new ABA wildlife value, then details how all 3 updates work together. This will be done by reviewing a geophysical application intersecting with the Fisher Wildlife Habitat Area, ABA status normal. Using ArcGIS, you can see that the proposed geophysical works overlap with a WHA that is less than 100 hectares. We know that it's less than 100 hectares, this WHA, because it is also inclusive. You can see there is a buffer around the WHA. This has been put on all WHA less than 100 hectares to protect edge-sensitive species. You'll note that BCGW, because this is an ABA-specific buffer, BCGW WHAs do not include the buffers, and your mapping will look slightly different in BCGW than it does in EIMS. Next, determine your tag number, species, and the ABA status of this WHA. We can see here that this is a Fisher WHA, tag number 9 of 107, and the ABA status is normal. Here we've created a bit of a flow chart for what to do. First, ask what is the status of the wildlife area. In this case, it's normal. So the very next question you would have to ask is, does this application adhere to the PALMs? So in order to understand if our application is going to adhere to the PALMs, we need to first look at the EPMG general wildlife measures, and then we would go into EIMS and pull up 9 of 107, which is our Fisher WHA. From here, we can see what the key management objectives and management responses are for this Fisher WHA. We can also see some higher level ABA guidance. Next, we'll toggle over to the species information, and we can discover for Fisher the specific planning and operational measures that need to be met. Here, the objectives are to maintain habitat, so you'd want to plan to avoid, and minimize disturbance of occupied dens, so timing. Planning measures. We need to identify and avoid Fisher denning areas. Buffer 500 meters from occupied dens and 200 meters from unoccupied. One key feature for Fishers is to maintain connectivity between the riparian denning areas and the upland foraging habitat. We can do this by maintaining riparian reserve zones and coarse woody debris piles. Operational measures, again, it's in a time and a manner. So we want to adhere to the timing windows, and where that's not possible, the setback requirements. In disturbed areas, we would like to see piles of coarse woody debris created to allow for safe movement of Fisher from riparian areas to foraging habitat. Also, we want to see these areas promptly deactivated upon completion of the activity. In this particular area, we do have some activity-specific planning and operational measures in EIMS. For seismic, some of the key things that are expected should an application need to go forward in this WHA, the expectation is that industry will minimize impacts to large diameter trees, coarse woody debris will be left, and standing deadfall will be avoided through meandering avoidance. We're looking for you to lay out your program in a manner that avoids Fisher habitat, which is large diameter trees and hazard trees, to minimize requirements to remove and fall trees, avoid placing seismic shot lines within the identified habitat, and limit activity in general within riparian areas by dead-ending and use of existing crossings. If your application is ABA status normal and adheres to the PALMs, indicate this on the Stewardship tab again by checking yes to where it asks if the application adheres to the EPMG. If your application is ABA status normal, but does not adhere to the PALMs, you will indicate no, the application does not adhere to the EPMG, and you will need to upload your rationale or mitigation strategy. Our fourth and final scenario is similar to our third scenario, except this time the WHA is ABA status regulatory policy. In ArcGIS, you can see that our application overlaps another WHA. We will need to determine the tag number, species, ABA status. In this case, again, it's a Fisher WHA. Tag number is 9 of 100, and the ABA status is regulatory policy. You will note again that this is a WHA under 100 hectares because we can see a 100-meter buffer for edge-sensitive species has been applied. And you can also see again that this is not the case in the BCGW maps. Again, we're going to ask you to look at your flow chart. What is the ABA status of this wildlife area? In this case, it's regulatory policy. So you need to review EIMS for specific guidance for this WHA. And based on that guidance in EIMS and other information, submit your mitigation strategy. Again, we say this application is ABA status, regulatory policy, so that means a mitigation strategy is required. But there's also some additional information in EIMS about exactly what is required for this Fisher WHA. And here it is. Avoidance is expected for all activities as these areas are sensitive to disturbance. If the activity is not locationally flexible and you will be going ahead with an application in this area, then specific measurements must be followed for an application to be considered. Key things: no seismic shot lines. Refer to all the Fisher planning and operational measures. This application will also be requiring a mandatory stewardship review. This is an internal commission process. When an application comes in regulatory policy, it automatically triggers a stewardship review. Applications will also require a mitigation strategy. In EIMS, you'll be required to upload it will say the application is within an area-based analysis, enhanced management, or regulatory policy area. Here you will need to upload your mitigation strategy. This is not a changed process. This is similar as it was before. And then where it asks if the EPMG, if the application adheres to the EPMG, you will click yes. And that is how you let us know. So this is the end of the scenario training, and we can move into some questions.